Tim LeBon is a distinguished academic and practitioner in the fields of philosophy, psychology, and psychotherapy. He earned a first class degree in philosophy, politics, and economics from Oxford University, followed by an MPhil in philosophy, ethics, and ancient philosophy from London University. After a stint in the software industry, Tim trained in counseling and psychotherapy, becoming a pioneer of the philosophical counseling movement in the UK. His first book, Wise Therapy, was published in 2001. Tim later returned to Oxford, earning a distinction at the Oxford Center for Cognitive Therapy, achieving an unusual double first. He is now a founding member and director of research for the Modern Stoicism team. Currently, Tim maintains a private therapy, counseling, and life coaching practice via Zoom. He also works part time in the NHS as a senior IAPT high intensity CBT therapist and lectures at City University and City Lit in London. Tim has authored two additional books, Achieve Your Potential with Positive Psychology, published in 2014, and 365 Ways to Be More Stoic, released in November of 2022. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Tim LeBon.
Thank you, Phil, for that introduction. I'll try and live up to that. So lovely to see you all. Here's the plan. So my own personal belief is that Stoicism is a practical philosophy that can facilitate resilience and eudaimonia, by which we mean kind of true happiness, more than happiness, not just feeling good, but being a good person and flourishing in the full sense of the word. Uh, Stoicism can sometimes seem complicated, uh, but the other risk is that it's oversimplified or misrepresented. So what I'm trying to do uh, is to present Stoicism so it's simple but not oversimple, and so it's acceptable, helpful, and also potentially learnable. And you can be the judge about whether I've succeeded or not. So I'm going to start off with uh, what I call the three pillars of Stoicism. And because I do CBT therapy and some coaching, these are the three fundamentals. Now, the seasoned Stoics will recognize that there is more to Stoicism than these. And so later on, I'm going to be uh, incorporating these as the first three elements in the Stoic elevator. Stoic elevator has two more uh, ideas. So the idea is that these are the fundamentals about which I think pretty much everyone can agree, and there's a lot of evidence for them, and they're learnable. And then we can go from there to see if we want to introduce some of the other elements of Stoicism. So we're going to start off with the cognitive theory of the emotions. Uh, and you might be more familiar with it as Epictetus describes it, where he says, people are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of them. And in almost every CBT session, the therapist at the very start of therapy will socialize cognitive behavioral therapy clients with this same kind of example that would have been very kind of familiar uh, to Stoics a couple of thousand years ago. It's the same kind of idea. Uh, so here's an example. You wave at a friend in the street, but they seem to ignore you. How would you feel? Well, it depends how you see the situation, how you interpret it. Interpretation one, your friends ignored you on purpose. How would you feel? Well, they've ignored you. You're going to feel hurt or sad, maybe angry. But that's not the only way of looking at it. You could consider the possibility that they're distracted. And if you imagine that's how you see it, you probably won't have any strong feelings, or maybe you'd be concerned. Why are they distracted? Uh, so the point is that it's exactly the same event, but different emotions. And the Stoics believe that this insight is crucial to freeing ourselves from destructive and distressing emotions. Uh, and it's important to note that you do still feel emotions, but not so much the destructive and distressing ones. And this actually it's quite important to separate it out into two overlapping but distinct uh, components. So, first of all, you need to become more aware of your thinking. And that's sometimes called Stoic mindfulness. Uh, there's Marcus saying those who do not observe the movements of their own minds must of necessity be unhappy. Uh, or we could translate it into those three stages. Stop, take a moment and observe your thinking. So that's the first part of this first pillar. Whenever, particularly when we notice ourselves being caught up in in a strong emotion, stop, take a moment and observe our thinking. But it doesn't end there because the second part is more like cognitive therapy, where we notice what we're thinking and maybe we challenge it or try to see it a different way. And another of my favorite quotes, this one from Epictetus: everything has two handles, one by which it may be carried, another by which it cannot. Uh, or another way you could say it is try and think of a situation, how you can handle it a good way. How can I handle this situation well? So let's go back to our example. There you are. Your friends ignored you. You've waved. And you might feel the initial emotion, anger. Uh, but you notice what's going on. Why am I angry? Why am I starting to feel angry? And it's as if you've got a speech bubble coming out of your head. This is kind of what I tell new therapy clients, because it's not always obvious what the thought is when you feel a strong emotion. It's kind of imagine yourself in a graphic cartoon. You're the hero of the cartoon, or perhaps the anti-hero. What's coming out of the speech bubble or the thought bubble? In this case, they've snubbed me. Okay, so you've noticed it. What now? Seek a more realistic or more helpful way of looking at things, which in this case could be, well, they did look quite absorbed, actually, now I come to think of it. Maybe they didn't notice me. And then you'll feel neutral or perhaps concerned for your friend. Now, obviously, this can apply to much more extreme cases of emotion and situations, but that's the basic idea. And as I already said, uh, this has become very influential in modern day CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. Uh, the history is there on the page. I won't read it all out, but people like Ellis and Beck read Epictetus and invented CBT. Now, there's more to CBT than Stoicism, uh, in that they've developed a whole load of disorder-specific protocols, and there's a whole behavioral side to it as well. Uh, but nevertheless, this basic Stoic ideas are a key part of CBT. CBT's got a robust evidence base. Uh, and so remember where I was asking, are these three pillars true? Well, the cognitive theory of emotions seems to be pretty much accepted in some way. How we think affects how we feel. There might be more to the story of that than that, but it certainly seems to be uh, valid. And is it helpful? The evidence is yes, it can be very helpful. Moving on to the second pillar, the virtues. Uh, so what are the virtues? Well, according to the Stoics, they're skills that help you to live well and to be happy. So there's no tragic choice between either being a good person or being happy. Generally, you can be both. And crucially, if you haven't got the virtues, you'll probably make a mess of your life. Now, Plato uh, identified four key cardinal virtues: wisdom, courage, self-control, and justice. So the Stoics agreed with Plato in that and would have advised you in the first place to cultivate these four qualities. And it should be said that these four qualities may not mean quite exactly what we might mean by them. Justice, for instance, includes qualities like compassion and kindness. And there's a whole families of qualities that might be included amongst these four key cardinal virtues. Uh, why, you might well ask, what do I want to do that for? Well, let's think about the human condition. We are with other people. We are not alone. We have fear. We have desires, and we've got a brain, and we've got the choice of how to use it. Uh, so these are the qualities that help us do well given the human condition. Justice, which obviously, as I said, includes qualities like love and kindness, allows us to have harmony in relationships with others. Courage means that we can manage fear. Self-control and moderation, we can manage our desires. And wisdom, all those things, including this piece of analysis and thinking about which virtue you need in a particular situation. So, as well as developing the virtues, the Stoics recommend that we use them. It's not much point just having them there without using them. Uh, Epictetus, when anything happens to you, always remember to turn to yourself and ask what power you have to deal with it. So, here's a question for you, and you might want to put your answers in the chat or just note it down for yourselves. Do you think someone's life is likely to go better if they develop and use the four virtues? Is it likely to go better for them? Is it likely to go better for other people? Would you like other people to be using those four virtues? Uh, would you want your children or friends to be using those four virtues? So there we're thinking about whether it has a positive relationship with well-being. And the second question, a bit of fun, is can you think of any fictional lives that have gone wrong because of the absence of these virtues? So uh, there are quite a lot. If you look at fables, for instance, there's lots of fables like Boy Who Cried Wolf, who lacked honesty, for instance. There's classical literature and there's kind of modern TV, which are lots of examples of people who don't follow this path and things go horribly wrong for them. Uh, Here's a couple of examples. Macbeth, this went pretty bad for him, and Walter White. Yeah. So that's kind of anecdotal, but psychologists have got very interested in this idea that virtues are a good thing. And uh, and then they've kind of divided these four virtues into 24 character strengths. Uh, so they kind of subdivided wisdom into things like love of learning and perspective. Uh, and they found that all of these 24 strengths are associated with life satisfaction, and some of them more than others. And so that's a pretty strong evidence for what the Stoics believed, which is that developing the virtues are a pretty good thing. I should add that Stoicism would go a bit further than the modern psychologists, because Stoics, we'll talk about that when we talk about the Stoic elevator and the fourth element of Stoicism. But another key point is that the Stoics thought that wisdom was the key virtue. You need wisdom, otherwise the other strengths can actually be misused. For instance, you wouldn't want Pilot, who was very optimistic and carried on with the takeoff, even though there were some very strange sounds emanating from the plane. Okay, so the third pillar, you might have expected this to be the first one. I was chatting to a friend yesterday, and he's he's kind of a very part-time Stoic, if at all. And he said, "Oh yeah, Stoicism. What's that? Yeah, that's all about controlling what you can control, isn't it?" And he said, "Is that the most important thing?" And I said, "Well, it's important, but it certainly isn't the only thing." And I think on the internet sometimes you'll see this dichotomy of control perhaps being uh, over-egged, perhaps, in the sense that it's not the only important element of Stoicism. Nevertheless, it's brilliant, dichotomy of control. Uh, some things are under some things are within our direct control and other things are not. And the question is, what is within our direct control? The answer is not as much as we think. And in fact, it's only our actions and how we think about things. Uh, and we spend too much time trying to control other things. It's a very useful idea. Clinically, as a therapist, it's a very useful idea. People are often find themselves ruminating about the past, which they can't control, worrying about the future, which they can't control, trying to control other people when they can't. Uh, so it is a really powerful idea. Uh, Someone's asking about Stoic Week and any changes this year. Well, that's one change. We've got some nice sketches for each day, and that's the sketch we've got for day one, which uh, relates actually this to the Serenity Prayer as well, and the idea of the Stoic archer, which many of you might be familiar with. Like the archer, you can control how you take aim, how you practice, but not the outcome, and that's fine. So I'd like you to consider this scenario. You're at the airport and your plane is delayed. There is no information except for the repeated announcement that this airport is the busiest and most efficient in the world. How could the dichotomy of control help you? And you might like to write in the chat for the next few seconds some thoughts about. You've probably been in a similar situation. How the dichotomy could hold you can help you if you're kind of delayed. And one person who I know has been in this situation is our host, Phil, because Phil kindly contributed this as an example in my 365 Ways to Be More Stoic. So I'm going to ask Phil to read it out, just to clarify the dichotomy of control in the diagram. Uh, this is the theory. Up to you is uh, what virtue you use, how you think about things, and if the things are not up to you, you need to practice acceptance. Phil, over to you.
As I write this, I am sitting inside, by its own claim, the world's busiest and most efficient airport. I've heard that announced on the overhead speaker several times by the mayor of the city in which I am stranded, Atlanta. I'm on a family trip, a sometimes stressful event anyway, sitting at the wrong gate. The seating area of my proper gate is overflowing with stranded, cranky passengers. You know what? It's okay. While I have zero control over the weather, the airlines, and my fellow passengers, I've got control over me. I know that I can choose how to respond. I love having that power, keeping my head when others are losing theirs. I think it makes me a better person, husband, father, and citizen.
Well said, Phil. So I think we've got a poll now. So which of these Stoic pillars that we've introduced so far do you find most useful?
I think we made him forced a choice here. They have to force rank, so it might make it harder. All right, I think we got a lot of good answers. I'm gonna go ahead and share this with everybody.
So the dichotomy of control is the winner. It is very useful. Uh, I would urge you all though to think about the Stoic mindfulness and therapy, because if you're not aware of your thoughts and you're not aware of your emotions, then it's hard to know to put the dichotomy of control into practice sometimes. And then when you're thinking about what you can control, it's about being virtuous. So uh, I'm kind of because the dichotomy of control is so popular, I'm kind of being a bit of a cheerleader for the other two pillars as well. But thank you so much uh, for sharing your insights. So uh, you might be thinking, uh, Tim, you said you weren't going to make Stoicism oversimple, and you said that Stoicism sometimes misrepresented. Aren't you doing that? Because isn't there more to Stoicism than just these three things? And I wouldn't disagree with you. But the reason that I start with these three is because I believe these are all acceptable to most people, and there's a lot of evidence that supports them, and they're all very helpful. So that's why we start with three, and particularly, I work in the NHS. Uh, if you kind of introduce any of these three ideas to people, then it's not like you're preaching your own kind of cult or religion. This is kind of mainstream ideas that I think everyone will find helpful. But if you go and read Epictetus, Marcus, Seneca, you will see lots of other ideas there. And that's why I came up with this idea of the Stoic elevator. Uh, what's that? Well, that's someone in an elevator thinking about how far they want to take Stoicism. And you'll recognize these three ones as the three we've already talked about. But the other two, the kind of what you might consider the more advanced Stoicism, or you might consider the more debatable parts of Stoicism, depending on how you look at it, is the idea that virtue is sufficient for well-being, prioritizing character over everything else, and the Stoic worldview, which includes a whole load of ideas. Uh, so, is virtue actually sufficient for eudaimonia? Uh, if you're good, is that enough to be flourishing? Well, there are arguments that suggest it is. Uh, Look at Walter White and what happened to him. If you prioritize other things like money, status over virtue, if you kind of do things, the lack of virtue, life will tend to catch up with you. Uh, so that's one of the ideas that virtues make the difference between using other things well. You can use money for good or you can use it for evil. Therefore, that virtue has a higher quality than the others, no matter what quantity of money you get. Uh, but that is quite a controversial line to take. Uh, so whilst kind of all the ancient Stoics would have agreed with that, there would be plenty of ancient philosophers and modern philosophers who wouldn't. And perhaps most famously, Aristotle, who was a virtue ethicist. He thought virtues were incredibly important, but he argued that actually you need some external goods for complete well-being. If you're really ill, if you're in extreme poverty, then you can't really flourish, according to Aristotle. Now, I'm not going to take sides here, except I am kind of, because I'm going to argue that even if you don't fully hold that technically it's true that virtue is sufficient for eudaimonia, uh, it's still potentially a helpful idea to have. Does that make sense? There are some things which, even though they're not quite true, they're useful things to believe. You get better outcomes if you take that mindset. Uh, so I think that if you kind of really buy into that idea, then you've got a really strong philosophical anchor. You'll prioritize your moral development and personal growth. You'll be a better person. You'll be a more reliable person. Uh, so that's the question. Do we go up to the fourth level of the elevator? Do you think that uh, virtue is sufficient for eudaimonia? And even if you're not sure, do you think it's kind of a helpful thing to act as if it's true? So that's one question. And now we get on to even kind of knottier ideas of the Stoic worldview. Now, we haven't got time to talk about all the elements of the Stoic worldview, but they would include some of these ideas. Uh, Interconnectedness. Everything's connected. No individual stands apart from the rest. That sounds pretty true. That's a good idea. Cosmopolitanism. We're part of a global community. All citizens of the world. Wouldn't disagree with that myself, but some people would. Uh, but now we move on to other things that are rather more debatable, according to a kind of scientific view. We've got the logos, the idea that the universe operates under a rational organizing principle that governs everything. We've got the idea of providence, that nature is good. Everything has a purpose and follows its course. And we've got pantheism, the idea that God, the divine, is not separate from the world, but is present in everything. Now, uh, Stoics in general did believe all those things. Some of them emphasized some parts more than others. Uh, and the question that almost everyone who's kind of picks up a Stoic book of an ancient Stoic says, huh, do I have to believe all of this stuff to be a Stoic? Uh, and Chris Gill, who was mentioned earlier today, actually argues that some of the ancient Stoics, although they might believe these Stoic worldview, they didn't rely on it. They thought the Stoic ethics could be justified in its own right. So I think that's an important thing to note. Again, I want to say that even if we don't agree with all these elements of the Stoic worldview, they could still be helpful. For example, uh, interconnectedness can foster empathy and cooperation. Cosmopolitan can help us be more compassionate and reduce prejudice. Some of these other ideas, the Logos can help us accept events beyond our control. Uh, the idea of providence can make us more optimistic. Uh, so the question is, do you want to ride to the top of the Stoic elevator? Perhaps you're already there. Perhaps you're kind of disagreeing with me and thinking that I'm suggesting that you might not want to. Uh, uh, or perhaps you kind of think, no, I can't go there with the worldview, or I'm not sure about this idea that virtue's sufficient for well-being. So I'm really interested in your ideas, and I think if you'd like to put things in the chat, and we might well kind of discuss that later as well. So this is an opportunity for you to put in the chat whether you want to ride to the top of the Stoic elevator. How far do you want to go in the Stoic elevator? I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about that. Just reading what some people have put. See, someone's put four, someone's put not interested in level five, someone's put top. Uh, so, so definitely to floor four, all on board. Someone says it makes sense, more sense with the worldview. Okay, so very interesting thoughts there, and that might be something for us to talk about more. Now, just to finish off with, we asked you at the very start to think about Marcus 2.1 because, of course, when he's writing his meditations, Marcus is just writing for himself. He's not kind of explaining Stoicism. And so all these ideas are kind of mixed together in a way that when you read it and you think, gosh, where's that idea coming from? Uh, and so what I wanted to do was to show you Marcus 2.1 again, uh, and have a look at it yourself, and then have a think about which elements relate to which parts of the elevator. And I've color coded them. Uh, it's not quite a one-to-one correspondence. Some of them might correspond to different ideas. Uh, but I'll give you a minute to read it and see which parts are to do with the dichotomy of control, which parts are to do with Stoic mindfulness and managing emotions, which to do with uh, the virtues, particularly wisdom, I think, which ones to do with Stoic worldview, and which ones to do with virtue being all you need to be happy. Because I think all of them are there. All of them are there. And perhaps depending on how far you go in the elevator, you might respond to different bits of it. I'll give you a minute or so to do that, and then I'll tell you how I see it. Okay. So tell yourself early in the day, I shall meet with people who are meddling, ungrateful, abusive, treacherous, envious, and unsociable. I think that's Stoic therapy. I think there, Marcus is, it's obviously a premeditation of adversity, but he's kind of uh, reminding himself of these things so that he can have different emotions uh, when he comes to it. And it's also kind of a mindfulness exercise. It's bringing this to the front of his mind. They're liable to all these failings because they do not understand what is good and bad. But I have recognized the nature of the good and seen that it is what is right, and of the bad, that it is what is wrong. And I have recognized the nature of the person who goes wrong, and seen that they are my relative, not because we share blood and seed, but because they share the same mind and portion of divinity. Now, I've put that as wisdom. You can also see elements of worldview as well in that. He goes on, I cannot be harmed by any of them because nobody will involve me in wrongdoing. Well, you could say that's a bit of a dichotomy of control because I can control what I do. I think it's also virtue sufficient for well-being. I can't be harmed by them. Even if they kind of abuse me, it doesn't harm me because they can't stop me being virtuous. Really crystal clear. Nor can I be angry at my relative or hate them. I put that as a dichotomy of control because that's what you can control. You can control whether you're angry. You could say it's also some of the worldview because he's calling them the relatives, even though they're not, strictly speaking, a relative. And then the last part, we were born to work together, like feet or hands or eyelids, or the rows of upper and lower teeth. So to work against each other is unnatural, and resentment and rejection count as working against someone. You could say that wisdom, that's wisdom. Uh, I think it's also part of the worldview and the idea of I don't know, all of them really. There's a rational order, that cosmopolitanism. So I don't know whether that kind of helps us see how the genius of Marcus Aurelius really, and I think why that uh, very start of Meditations, book two, resonates so well with people because he gets so many ideas, Stoic ideas, and puts them together into such a beautiful way of responding to some of life's vicissitudes. And uh, that's all I wanted to present at the moment. Because I think we'll have some time for some questions and some breakouts to go further into some of this materials. Thank you very much.